Hello, and welcome to the Growing Our Family podcast, Pregnancy Edition, where we'll discuss topics ranging from your very first positive test all the way through delivery. I'm your host, Brittany, and I'm a new mom to a beautiful baby boy. Throughout my pregnancy, I did hours of research on everything that came my way. Join me on a weekly chat where I'll share my knowledge and personal experiences with all of you. You are listening to episode 13, Everything You Need to Know About Breastfeeding. Hey there, mamas. Leading up to delivery, you might start hearing some stories about people's breastfeeding journey. Some will be positive, but others might be a little bit negative. Here are some tips to help you get through that steep learning curve once your baby is born. First, let me just say that I am a strong believer in fed is best. I don't really think like breast is best or formula is best. It's all based off of your experience, and I know some moms can't breastfeed or just choose not to, which is totally okay. This is not a post to shame those moms. This is a post to help moms that decided they want to give breastfeeding a shot to help them out in their journey. So whether, I'm sorry that if you're listening to this and you plan on not breastfeeding, this post is like pretty much on that, and feel free to tune in next week for something that is not breastfeeding based, but this whole post is all about helping you out and giving you some advice on your breastfeeding journey. And the following information is a combination of my own knowledge and experiences along with information that I pulled from a few evidence-based websites, and I'll list those at the end and kind of throughout the article as well. This should not be taken as medical advice. If you are experiencing difficulties, it is best to meet with an international board-certified lactation consultant, or IBCLC, who can assess you and give you personalized advice based off of the issues that you're having. So that's it for that. I'm going to just dive right in. So before delivery, there are some things you can do to help make your breastfeeding experience a little bit easier. Here is a list of tasks you can do and the products I have used that have made a significant positive impact on my breastfeeding journey. The first one is creating a breastfeeding station, or even two. Choose a spot in your house that you plan on spending most of your time after baby arrives. For me, this was actually two locations. One was upstairs and one downstairs. We live in a tri-level house, and I don't really spend much time downstairs in like the bottom third level, except for right now because that's where my office is. But other than that, there isn't really a lot of living space down here. So I chose the end spot on the couch in like the main floor. I call it the downstairs, because it has a recline option, it has a side table where I can keep all my stuff and my water, and it also has a prime spot right in front of the TV, which when you're breastfeeding constantly during those first few weeks, it's really nice to have something to watch or a book to read, whatever you like to do in your free time, just to help you get through all of the time you're going to spend breastfeeding your baby. The other spot that I chose was my rocking chair, which is upstairs in the nursery, and that's where I fed during nighttime feeds. I learned it was super important to get out of bed so I didn't end up losing the association between bed and sleep. So I would go into my son's room, into the nursery, and feed him in the rocking chair, even though we had him in a bassinet in our bed. Some days I would just pull him out and feed him when it was easy. But some of the bigger feeds, I kind of knew after a little bit what his schedule was going to be like. So, he would wake up at like midnight and like 3 a.m. and again at like 5 a.m. And I would take him into the nursery because those would be longer feeds where he's like actually really hungry, versus sometimes when I know he woke up and just needs, just something to help him fall back asleep, I would feed him right there in the bed. But I didn't want to lose that association between bed and sleep. I started to, and then I had to kind of like retrain my body to be able to go back to sleep after nighttime feeds. Sitting up in the chair also helped keep me awake, because you will learn that you are so tired and so sleep deprived that if you lay in bed and try to feed your baby, it's really easy to doze off, and that can be really dangerous. So that's why I chose my rocking chair in the nursery. It was also really comfy. I could turn the light on without waking up my husband. And it was a really great spot to feed him. So you can read a little bit more about midnight feeding insomnia. If you're curious about that, I'll link to that in my show notes. It's a previous post I did, and it's also one of my podcasts on the parenting series. So you can check that out in the show notes if you want to read a little bit more about that. It just gives some tips on how to easily fall back asleep and some things to do, some things not to do in those middle of the night feeding sessions to help you go back to sleep quickly and get as much sleep as possible, which is very important for all parents. So these are some of the things that I kept in my basket next to my breastfeeding station. The first is water for you. Everyone has their favorite water bottle. Mine is the Contigo Auto Spout. It's stainless steel. I used it in labor. I loved it during breastfeeding because you can tip it on its side, which is really great when I was like reclined back in the couch, and it doesn't spill. Some of my standard like tumblers that have the straw coming out, they kept spilling on baby's head when I tipped it to the side so I could get the straw in my mouth. And the stainless steel one kept my water nice and cold all day. So I really liked that one. If you don't have a favorite water bottle, I'll link to that one in the show notes. I know, not really totally baby related, but it was super useful. And it's really important to have a really nice like water bottle that you just kind of keep with you all the time. I learned that if I had it in the water bottle like that, I drank way more water than if I just had like a cup with ice in it. I would finish that really quickly and then either forget to or be too lazy or have the baby sleeping in my arms, so I didn't get up and refill it. The next thing I had was disposable and reusable nursing pads. I started with the Bamboobies reusable pads, but they didn't absorb enough during the middle of the night, so the milk would kind of just sit on my breasts, and that is the best way to end up with mastitis or an infection. But they are really nice for during the day when you don't really leak as much. I found that the Lanisau disposable pads worked really great for overnight. So I kind of use both of them just depending. You'll kind of figure out your groove and when you kind of leak more or when you need different ones. So I just went back and forth. It took me a few days to figure out which ones I prefer, but I definitely liked having both of them. And the Bamboobies really make me feel like I'm not being super wasteful because they're reusable. So I just throw them in the wash and wash them. And so those are really nice just to keep any like extra milk or, right after baby feeds, there's a little bit extra milk on there. Or if I used the nipple cream, it kept it off of the inside of my bra. I also packed burp cloths for burping after each feeding. And my Haka, which I know I've talked about previously on this podcast. You should definitely get one of these. You can pop it on the other side and collect some extra milk. And this is a great way to start a freezer stash before heading back to work, or just save up for a little bit of a rainy day if you need some milk or if you want to go out and leave the baby with someone else for a little bit, you have some milk stored up. So I love my Haka. I'll link to my review in the show notes if you want to read more about it. I kind of went over the different options. They have multiple different ones on the market, so I kind of went through the pros and cons of each one so you know which one will be the best fit for you. In my basket, I also have a phone charger. There isn't much to do while breastfeeding, so I spent a lot of time on my phone. It drains the battery so fast, so it's really nice to have an extra phone cord or a wireless charger or maybe even both. And then my breastfeeding pillow, I kept right next to it. I love my Boppy. I used it in the hospital, and it was so helpful because we had issues latching at the beginning. So it just really helps like prop you up and get you in the right position. And it also like helps support your arms so you're not sitting there trying to hold the whole weight of your baby for the whole time. So I really love my Boppy. When I got home, I kept my Boppy upstairs in the rocking chair, and then I just used one of our throw pillows on the couch downstairs. But if you have two of them, that works just as well. That's just something else I had in my basket. And then I kept some snacks in there. You burn about 500 calories a day breastfeeding, so it's really important to keep up on your water and your calorie intake. Some high energy healthy snacks that I kept on hand included like trail mix, some nuts. You can keep dried fruit. If you like bananas, you can keep some of those nearby. Just easy things that will last a little bit, and you don't have to heat up. You don't have to prepare. You just open it up and take a snack while you're starving and you're feeding your baby for the 8th time that day. Keep some tissues nearby for leaks, small spit ups, to blow your own nose, really anything. We go through so many tissues now that our son is born. I literally have a box or two in every single room. And then you'll also want to keep your remotes nearby for just about anything you need. TV, if you have remotes for your ceiling fan or lights. I have a portable heater that we used during the middle of winter when my son was first born up in his nursery. So I would turn that on and off as needed. So just anything nearby, just keep in your basket, because it really sucks to have your ceiling fan going and you start to get chilly and you have no way to get up and turn it off. Or same with if it's the winter time, if you have your heater going and you want to turn it off because you're starting to get too warm or you're cold and you want to turn it on, just it's easy to have them nice and close. And then nipple cream, I used the one by Bamboo Bees again. It was great because it's organic and you don't have to wipe it off in between feeding sessions. It's totally safe for baby to ingest. It's such a small amount because you put it on right after you feed. And then it's like, an hour and a half or an hour, maybe 2 if you're lucky, in between like the end of the feeding and the beginning of the next one. So that's really great. I liked it. It seemed to work really well, and I also used it on my lips because I didn't keep any chapstick nearby, which if you would like chapstick, I would keep some of that in your box as well, because for some reason, maybe it's just because it was in the middle of winter or who knows what, but my lips got super chapped, and I always remember wishing I had chapstick nearby. And then you can keep some heating or cooling pads for if you get engorged or just if you have any discomfort. I have the Medela cooling pads, which are great for if you have any discomfort, if your nipples are cracked or bleeding, it really helps soothe them. And then receiving blankets. Babe will fall asleep while eating a lot of the time, so you can just cover them up and enjoy those sweet little snuggles while they lay on your chest, and they're so cute. So I just kept a receiving blanket to kind of keep them warm. They're really bad at regulating their temperature when they're first born, and so you just want to keep them covered up and snuggled up against you most of the time. And then hair ties for sure, because babies love to aid in postpartum hair loss. So it's great to have some hair ties on hand to just throw your hair up and out of reach. I normally keep one on my wrist. And as I said that, I looked down and it's not there. So this is why I love keeping them in my basket, because sometimes you use them and then you just don't have them with you when you really need them. And then the last thing on my list is a nursing cover. You won't need it most of the time because it's just you or your significant other. But when you have guests over, it's really nice to have an easy cover up that you know exactly where it's at. And I didn't care for some of my guests, but like when I had grandparents or my dad was over, just it's nice to like cover up a little bit and just be a little bit more modest. So I linked to one that I really, really enjoy on my show notes. I bought it off of Amazon. It doubles as a car seat cover and a nursing cover. So check that one out. It's really great and it's very reasonably priced. So that's it for my bag, or my bin. The next topic I'm going to go over is the progression of your milk. Your body will start to produce colostrum during pregnancy, and some women start leaking, but don't worry if you don't start leaking during pregnancy. Colostrum is a sticky, thick, and yellow substance that contains everything your baby needs after birth. Their belly is only the size of like a marble when they're born. So don't worry if it doesn't seem like you're making a lot of milk, because baby doesn't need a lot of milk. Those few drops is everything they need in those first few days. The act of giving birth is what triggers your body to start producing mature milk. About 2 to 5 days after birth, your milk becomes a transitional milk, which is a mixture of colostrum and mature milk. It increases in volume as your baby's belly gets bigger, which is so amazing. Your body and baby are just so intertwined. It's truly amazing how just we don't even have to like think about it. Our body just knows what to do to make sure that our babies are taken care of. Shortly after your transition milk comes in, you will most likely wake up engorged with painful breasts, and this is when your mature milk has come in. This feeling of engorgement should only last a few days, and then your boobs will start to feel normal again. Don't worry when they start to feel soft again and like a little bit squishy. This does not mean that your supply went down. It just means that your body is adjusting to this new normal. I was so worried because, you're all engorged, and I thought this was going to be how life was after, I'm like, oh man, I'm going to have to go the next year of breastfeeding and my boobs are going to feel like this. And then I kind of freaked out after a few days because they went back to being squishy again. And I was really concerned that my milk supply had just gone away. But does not mean that you still have the same amount of milk. Your boobs just adjusted to it. During this phase of engorgement, though, it can be a little bit uncomfortable. So you can use a hot compress or hand express in the shower to help relieve some of that discomfort. Or you can use the Haakaa a little bit to just take the pressure off if baby is no longer interested, if their belly's full and you can't get them to drink. This is another great time for the Haakaa because it doesn't trigger your body to produce more. It just helps relieve some of that discomfort. You don't really want to pump because in this early stage, you're telling your body how much milk you need, and your milk supply is still being established. So if you go and pump, then you're telling your body you need everything your baby's eating plus what you're pumping, and you're going to have a crazy oversupply and be stuck having to pump at all those same times. So try not to completely empty your breasts. That's why the Haakaa is so amazing. And then next on my list for during pregnancy is find an international board certified lactation consultant. Say that 10 times fast. You can also call them an IBCLC. A lot of people refer to them as a lactation consultant just in general, which is totally fine. But just to let you know, the term lactation consultant is not an official title. So therefore, it does not necessarily mean that all lactation consultants have the required training and certifications needed to be an IBCLC. I'm sure there are some really, really great lactation consultants out there, but you'll be better off finding an IBCLC. And the International Board Certified Lactation Consultant has to take college-level courses. They take lactation-specific courses, pass a test, and complete hundreds or sometimes even thousands of hours of supervised training under another IBCLC. So they go through so much training. They are the experts in breastfeeding and breast milk and everything that has to do with it. They take way more training than even like your pediatrician does or most people's pediatricians. They have more knowledge than them. So my pediatrician actually deferred me, gave me some advice, and I said, oh, that kind of contradicts. And he goes, oh, okay, go with what the lactation consultant said because, they have more training in this. So that was really surprising to me. I thought the pediatrician was going to be the most educated person in everything that has to do with my baby, but turns out finding an IBCLC is the best way to achieve your breastfeeding goals and just get really great information from them. So passing all these tests and completing all these hours that they have to do, it is no small task, but it does guarantee that your IBCLC is properly trained and equipped to help you in all of your breastfeeding needs. So now that you kind of know what an IBCLC is, here is what they actually do. So actually, the better question is what they don't do. They are trained to handle any difficulty you might experience through your breastfeeding journey. They help determine difficulties with baby, such as lip or tongue ties. They help mom with perfecting a latch, demonstrate ways to hold the baby while feeding. They monitor and track weight gain, and they're just there to support you through anything else that you might experience. They're amazing. They're like the Santa Claus of the breastfeeding world. My son was born 3 weeks early, and we had some difficulties with latching in the beginning. They diagnosed him with uncoordinated sucking, which I didn't even know was a thing, but pretty much what it meant was his brain wasn't developed enough to move his mouth and his tongue together, like with each other. So he just wasn't taking enough milk in the beginning and was really having a hard time even latching on. We supplemented with donor milk at the hospital while we tried over and over and over again to correct our latch. Although nurses and other hospital personnel are so amazing at what they do and they have had training in breastfeeding, they just cannot match the experience and the expertise held by an IBCLC. We were able to latch on our first try with an IBCLC after many, many failed attempts with other nurses and stuff, and again, they were giving me all of the information. I watched videos beforehand and they have some really great info. It's just our situation was a little bit different than the standard. And so it just took someone that was an expert in the field to get us to the point that the baby would latch on and eat. And this is when I realized just how important lactation consultants are when you're just starting out. My advice to moms is to find an IBCLC or ask for one in the hospital if your hospital has them on staff. You may not need one, and that's totally fine. I really hope you don't need one and that your journey just starts off perfectly. But having one selected with a phone number on hand and knowing exactly who you want to go to in case you do have struggles can really relieve the stress if things aren't going as planned. You can call your insurance as well and find out if they cover anything in terms of breastfeeding support. My insurance fully covered 9 one-on-one appointments, which was amazing. I didn't even use all of them. And it was just such a great thing to have. And then you can also look and find a breastfeeding support group. I also recommend going to these even if breastfeeding is going well. They are so amazing. You can ask your pediatrician, search on Google, talk to the hospital, or even reach out to your local La Leche League. They're also LLL for short, and find a free breastfeeding support group near you. This will not only help you with any concerns that might come up along your journey, but it'll also help you connect with other moms. And this is such a great time to just even get out of the house. Our breastfeeding group was every Tuesday. It was at 11 a.m., so not too early. I would get up, we'd go. I got to do weighted feeds, which is where you weigh your baby, then you feed them and weigh them again and find out exactly how much milk they drank, which is really great because that's the only way you'll find out if you're exclusively breastfeeding. And then we would just sit around in a group and talk about issues, and it's just really nice to hear that, other people's stories and what's going on with them, because you never know when that might come up for you. So sometimes someone would talk about an issue they were having, and then a few days later, I would run into the same exact issue, and I already knew what to do to help solve it. And then afterwards, we would all get together, all the moms, and we'd go on a walk by the river with our babies in the strollers. And it was just so great to get out of the house. I looked forward to my breastfeeding groups, even if I wasn't having any issues, and I just really loved going. So don't feel shy. You can also swing into one before you have your baby, and if you're worried about breastfeeding, you can listen in. I thought it was going to be weird, so I didn't do it, and now that I've had my baby, I would love to help out a soon-to-be mom and show them exactly how to latch on a baby, because I think seeing it really makes a difference. There were times that our feeding schedule would change and my son was still within his like dirty diaper okay range as well. And once I showed up to our weekly group to find out my son had lost weight during that time, he went from gaining 16 ounces per week, which is a crazy amount, to losing 6 ounces in the same week, which was a huge swing. I could not imagine having to wait until our next pediatrician well check to find out that our new system just wasn't working for us. By then, my supply would have been pretty trashed, and it would have been much harder to put the weight back on. Knowledge is power, and keeping track of a change in your life affects the baby is so important. So I can't stress enough how much I appreciate someone suggesting these groups to me and the fact that I went. And that was probably the greatest thing in my entire breastfeeding journey. Feeding schedule. So a breastfed baby has to eat between 8 and 12 times per day in the beginning. And I found that feeding on demand was the best, not only for weight gain, but for our bonding as well. Plan to spend countless hours sitting on the couch and feeding your baby. You will feel like your baby is constantly eating, and that's totally normal. We fed every 2 hours from start to start. Even now, my son is almost 8 months old, and he still eats every 2 hours, but takes longer stretches during the night. Babies need so many calories within a 24-hour period, so the more that they eat during the day, the less they need to eat during the night, theoretically. So it doesn't really always work out for everyone. Like I said, my son was gaining 16 ounces a day. I think at one point he was eating like 16 or 17 times a day. It was crazy. I was a mess. And just because he was getting all those calories during the day, he still was waking up a lot during the night. So that's very theoretical. I really hope you don't have that issue. But if you do, just remember that it's such a short time. And even looking back, it's even hard to remember. Like, I remember being exhausted, but the time period was so small compared to the rest of his life so far that it's really not a big deal looking back. I wish I would have had this hindsight when I was going through it, because at the time I remember thinking this phase is never going to end, but it does end, I promise. You'll also want to keep an eye out for hunger cues to know when your baby is hungry. Crying is actually a late feeding cue and can usually make it harder for them to latch because they're upset and they're crying and they're starving, and then it flusters you. And so it's harder for you to like get the right thing because you're just trying to rush it. So it's important to keep an eye out for these hunger cues before you reach that crying phase. So 3 things that are pretty common. The first one is rooting, and this is where your baby will turn their head towards anything that touches their cheek, their mouth, or face. You might also notice when you're holding them, they're trying to like latch onto your shoulder, anywhere on your skin. If dad's holding them, they might try to latch on to dad, which is pretty comical. So just keep an eye out for them. They'll let you know. And then if they're sucking, either just making the movement or making the sound of sucking, that can also be a cue. And then putting anything near their mouth. At the beginning, this is usually just like their hand or their arm. And so just if you see any of those signs, just latch them, even if it hasn't been the full 2 hours or 3 hours, however long that you're going in between feeding. It's best to just let them eat when they want to eat, and it just really helps with their weight gain and keeping them nice and healthy. In the beginning, baby might eat less often during the morning and the day periods, but will likely want to eat multiple times in a very short period at night. This is called cluster feeding, and it is totally normal. They are stocking up on milk during this time, and it usually helps them sleep for a longer period of time. Usually. Babies will also take multiple growth spurts and will cluster feed, so your body knows that it needs to produce more milk. So some common times for a growth spurt is within the first few days, between 1 and 1.5 weeks, between 2 to 3 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, and then again at 3, 4, 6, and 9 months old. So those are just estimates. Every baby will be different, but if you're kind of around that range and it just seems like your baby is latched on constantly, that might be one of the reasons. Milk is based on a supply and demand basis. So the more you remove, the more it'll make. And typically more stimulations per day is much more effective than less feedings for a longer time. So it's better to feed them multiple times in a 24-hour period for, say they only eat for like 15 minutes, than having to feed them for like 30 or more minutes, even if it's less time. So you can read a little bit more about cluster feeding at kellymom.com. I'll link to the exact link in my show notes. Kelly Mom is an amazing breastfeeding support website. My lactation consultant recommended them, and I use it all the time for all these questions that I have. The next topic is milk pumping and storage. So check with your IB CLC before pumping within the first couple of weeks. This is when your milk is being established, and demanding the extra milk can actually cause an oversupply. And although it sounds great in theory, an oversupply can be a lot of work, having to constantly drain the milk, and you have to do this to avoid any painful clogged ducts or mastitis, which is a breast infection, and it causes like flu-like symptoms and is really miserable. I've had it, and you do not want to go through it. So just work with a lactation consultant. Again, I know I keep saying that, but I cannot tell you guys how beneficial their advice is and how much it can make a difference in your journey. So they will be able to give you things. I had to breastfeed at the beginning because we were still supplementing with my pumped milk along with breastfeeding, because my son, because he wasn't latching in the beginning, he lost more weight than what they typically recommend. So we were kind of playing catch up. So I was trying to bring my milk in faster, and I even rented a hospital grade pump just to get him as much food as possible. I am, again, a huge supporter of the Haka, and this, like I said earlier, goes on the opposite side while you're feeding baby, and it collects your letdown plus a little bit extra because it has like a suction to it. So it's a great way to get a small freezer stash started and doesn't take any extra time. And when you're putting it on, there is a hack. So if you fold the top flap down, then you put it up to your breast with your nipples centered in the middle, squeeze the bottom slightly, and then fold the top flap back over your boob. And this creates such a strong connection that it's really hard for it to fall off. According to the CDC, milk is good at room temperature, which is 77 degrees or colder, for up to 4 hours, in the refrigerator for up to 4 days, and in the freezer for 6 to 12 months. Now, this is more conservative than the time limits I was given from my lactation consultant, but I will let you talk to your specific consultant or your pediatrician to help give you more precise times if you would like, because I'm not an expert. I don't really want to give you guys different information, because I'm not honestly sure if that was taking into, like, what those numbers were taking into account. If my lactation consultant used the fact that it was the middle of January, she may have even asked me how cold we typically keep our house in the winter, which is pretty freezing. So all of that has a impact on it, and the CDC kind of has to be a little over conservative because their goal is just to make sure there's no bacteria growth. So those are the standards. And I'll tell you, I've gone a little bit over the 4 hours and everything's been fine. So you can read a little bit more about the storage guidelines. I'll link to those as well for the CDC website in my show notes. And then this last section, I just looked at the time and I realized that I will not have time to go through a product review today. So this will kind of take place. These are all the tips that I've learned in my experience that I wish I would have known beforehand. So these are things that I just either noticed while I was breastfeeding and was a little bit worried, had to do research, ask my lactation consultant. So I'm just going to share all of these with you guys now, and this will take place of the product review that I normally do. So things I wish I knew beforehand. First, the fats in your breast milk will separate, which is totally fine. You'll go to the fridge and it'll look so weird because the milk at the bottom will be see-through and almost like a light blue color. It's really weird. And then the top is just like a layer of fat. And I was really worried that the milk had gone bad. It did not. You just swirl it around for a little while, especially if you're heating it back up for the baby, and it'll just mix right back together. It's totally fine. This is completely normal. Second, do not heat up the milk in the microwave. This can create hot spots in the milk, and babies have ended up with third-degree burns in the emergency room because the milk feels fine on the outside and there's just like really hot portions of it on the inside that you can't feel when you test it. And it's so scary. So the best way to heat it up is either using a bottle warmer or running it under hot water in your sink. My daycare, they have a crock pot that has water in it. And they just put the bottle in the water, so it's just like always kind of warm. There's lots of different ways, but do not use the microwave. That's the worst way to do it. I've always just used the tap, and it works great. We have really hot water here. We have our water heater turned up pretty high. So it just warms it up pretty quickly, and our son will take lukewarm, even slightly cold milk, no problem. So we don't have to waste a lot of time heating it up. Third, sometimes milk will vary in color. Breast milk is amazing and is constantly changing to meet your baby's needs. It has like anti-allergies and like different immunities in it. It helps them with their sicknesses. So if they're starting to get a cold, your breast milk will actually change to give them more of what they need to get over the cold. It is so amazing. But sometimes I've noticed that if my son's starting to get a little sick or whatever, my milk will change color. So sometimes it'll be more yellowish. Sometimes it'll be have more of a blue tint to it. And this will literally change overnight or even like between feedings. I'll look at the first milk I pumped during the day and the last milk, and they're completely different colors, which is wild to me. But nothing's wrong with it. If your milk comes out a little bit blue, that's totally normal as well. 4, your nipples might bleed. Hopefully they will not. And with the correct support and a solid latch, your chances are better that they will not bleed. But express breast milk after each session and rub it on your nipples, and this will help them heal, and it'll also help remove the saliva. If you think about if you were to lick your lips all day, they'll get really chapped. Well, the same thing. You have saliva just sitting on your nipples. So rubbing the breast milk on them kind of gets the saliva off to help with them. And then also use some nipple cream, which I mentioned earlier. If they end up bleeding, you might notice some in your milk, but it's okay. It will not affect you or your baby or your milk. Number 5, when people talk about how often their baby is eating, they're timing it from start to start. So if they eat every 2 hours, this means that they will nurse at 12, 2, 4, 6, and so on. So it does not mean the time in between feedings. You don't get to feed them and then wait 2 hours and then start again, because a lot of times baby will eat for 30 plus minutes. And that would mean that you're actually feeding them every like 2.5 to 3 hours. Number 6, a great tip that I learned from my lactation consultant is to imagine your boob is a huge hamburger. With all the toppings, it's ginormous. You wouldn't just try to shove this in your mouth just straight. What you would do is you would hold it and squeeze it down, put the bottom of the burger into your mouth, like towards like your bottom lip and teeth, and then squish it and roll the rest in and try to get the top of your mouth over it. If you can imagine that. That is how you have to latch. Your baby you can't just like shove your whole boob in there, or else it doesn't get far enough back and your nipple will be in between their hard palate on the roof of their mouth, and this is what causes a lot of nipple damage. So if you can get that really, really deep latch, your nipple will fall in their soft palate, and when they suck, not only will they get more milk and be happier babies like that, it'll also really save your nipples from being in a lot of pain. So just squish your boob, roll it into their mouth. And again, if you know someone who breastfeeds, ask them to show you or ask your lactation consultant, and they will be able to help you out with that. Next one is, in the beginning, your nipples will feel sore and uncomfortable. Even with a good latch, it shouldn't hurt, but it still isn't pleasant. I was told from everyone, good latch, it doesn't hurt, it doesn't hurt, it doesn't hurt. It shouldn't hurt, I should say. A lot of people said that it does hurt, but it shouldn't. And I noticed, even though we had an amazing latch, I still was uncomfortable. I mean, if you imagine someone like with that much stimulation on any body part for 16 times a day for me, but even at 8 to 12, that's still just a lot. And it takes your body to get used to that. Your body will adjust, and breastfeeding will help you and baby create an amazing bond. And so I learned that I just kind of had to tough it out for a little bit, even though wasn't really painful. It's just very uncomfortable. But that totally goes away. Next is take it one day at a time and try not to overwhelm yourself with large expectations. Breastfeeding can be very hard at the beginning, both mentally and physically. It gets so much easier after a few weeks, and I actually so enjoy breastfeeding my son. I love it. I am so glad we made it through the beginning because I cannot imagine not having that bond with him. And so if you're feeling really overwhelmed and you feel like you can't make it, set yourself small goals. Instead of saying, you know what, my goal is to breastfeed for a year, say, my goal is to make it till tomorrow or till the end of the week or whatever seems reasonable to you. And then when you get there, reassess. If you decide that, it's just too much, then that's okay. That's not a competition. Your baby will be just fine if you decide that breastfeeding is too hard and you need to formula feed them. That's okay. But just take it one day at a time because that is the easiest way to just manage it. And every day for me got a little bit easier. I learned a little bit more. My baby and I just kind of connected a little bit better, and he learned how to breastfeed and I learned how to breastfeed him every single day. So that's just a great piece of advice from my lactation consultant. And we are almost at 8 months here, and I have no intention of quitting anytime soon. And then the last tip I have, your letdown can almost feel painful at times, or it can just feel tingly. For me, it feels like when your foot falls asleep and it's like really tingly, and then you go to walk on it and it's like kind of prickly. That's kind of how my letdown feels. It's not like painful. It's just like a weird feeling. And it just feels like this for like literally like 3 seconds, and then I'm soaked. And at the beginning, I didn't really know what that was. And I noticed that every time my boobs felt like that, my breast pads would be just drenched. Also, your milk can literally spray across the room at times, and that's totally normal as well. Sometimes baby will be eating and latched on really well, and they'll like pull off for a second, and your milk is just like going crazy, like spraying the baby in the face, like getting all over your clothes, and it's just nuts. So just a heads up, because I did not think that, it could turn into like a full-on fire hose. And I lied. Actually, my last piece of advice is to try to attend a breastfeeding class. I know most hospitals will have one for very little cost, and they are so informative. I talked on for, I'm going on almost 45 minutes here, and I still barely even touched on all the things there are to know about breastfeeding. These were all the important things that I personally wish I would have known beforehand, but the hospitals or these breastfeeding classes, they'll have visuals, they'll have demonstrations. They're usually taught by an IBCLC, and it's just so great to be able to have, one-on-one contact or, in a small group and be able to ask questions, and they'll have so much more information also because they're probably like 4 to 8 hours long. So I'm sure there's so much more information out there to be shared. If any of you moms have anything else to add, let me know. I'd love to add it. You can comment on my posts. You can send me a message on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. My handle is at growing our family. And just share your tips or tricks if I left anything out. And I just really want to get the information out there to all these new moms that might have questions. So anything is greatly appreciated. And then some of my resources that I use during is Kelly Mom, which Kelly Mom is an IBCLC and has amazing info on her website. It covers all aspects of breastfeeding, and she does a really great job of providing evidence-based information so you can make your own informed decisions. You can check her out on www.kellymom.com. And then I also pulled information from March of Dimes. They have a great article that covers a lot of basic breastfeeding information, and I will link to that specific website on my show notes. And then I also use the CDC for a lot of the storage guidelines, which I will link to that as well. So that is it this week on Growing Our Family Pregnancy Podcast. I'm so sorry that I went a little bit over this week, but I really hope that you found this information helpful. And if you need to see any of the stuff written down, because I know I covered so much, I will link to the blog post I did in my show notes, so you can check out the post I did and read through it if you want to recover any of the information on there. Make sure to visit our website, growingourfamily.com. That's growingourfamily.com to see today's show notes and product links. Also, don't forget to rate and subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you download your podcasts so you always get the latest episodes. If you love the show, the easiest way to support us is by clicking on any of the Amazon or Target links I have in the show notes or within my blog posts. I am an Amazon and Target affiliate, which means I do earn a very small percentage of anything you purchase through my links at no additional cost to you. So if you click on the link, even if you don't end up buying that particular item, I still get a small kickback from anything you add to your cart within 24 hours of clicking. You definitely don't have to, but it is a great way to help support the show if you're enjoying the content. If you've had your baby or just want to learn more about life after delivery, check out the Growing Our Family Parenting Edition. Please join me next week for another episode.